Good day everyone. So today I'm going to discuss about lesson 2, culture, the meaning, characteristic and functions. So the custom, traditions, attitudes, values, norms, ideas and symbols govern human behavior pattern. So the members of society not only endorse them but also mold their behavior accordingly. So they are the members of the society because of the traditions and customs which are common and which are passed down from generation to generation through the process of socialization. So this common pattern designate culture, and it's in terms of the culture that we are able to understand the specific behavior pattern of human beings' social relations. So next is cultural ideas emerge from social shared life. Culture is a way of life of a group of people, the behaviors, beliefs, values, and symbols that they accept, generally without thinking about them, and that are passed along by communication and imitation from one generation to the next. So now let's move on to the meaning of culture. So sometimes an individual is described as highly cultured person, meaning that the person in question has certain features such as his speech, manner, and taste for literature, music, or painting which distinguish him from others. So next is culture. In this sense refers to a certain personal characteristic of an individual. So however, this is not the sense in which the word culture is used and understood in social sciences. Why? Because sometimes culture is used in popular discourse to refer to a celebration or an evening of entertainment, as when one speaks of a cultural show. So in this sense, culture is identified with aesthetic or the fine arts such as dance, music, or drama. So this is also different from the technical meaning of the word culture. So next is culture is used in special sense in anthropology and sociology. It refers to the sum of human beings' life ways, such as their behavior, their beliefs, their feelings, and thoughts. So it connotes everything that is acquired by them as social beings. So culture has been defined in a number of ways. There is no consensus among sociologists and anthropologists regarding the definition of culture. So one of the most comprehensive definition of the term culture was provided by the British anthropologist Edward Tyler. He defined culture as the complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, arts, moral law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. So meaning that culture distinguishes a man from an animal. It is a culture that shapes our attitudes, social beliefs, values, and norms. So next is, there are some writers who add to this definition some of the important other capabilities and habits, so such as language and techniques for making and using tools. So next is, culture consists of all learned normative behavior patterns, so meaning that this is all shared ways of patterns of thinking and feeling as well as doing. So some of the thinkers includes in culture only the non-material parts. So for instance, Sutherland and Woodward says, if cultures exist only where there is communication, then the content of culture can be ideas or symbol patterns. So this means that culture is then an immaterial phenomenon only, a matter of thoughts and meanings and habits, and not visible, untouchable materials, things, or objects. The material elements that are made and used in accordance with socially inherited tradition should be called cultured objects. So next is, others include in culture all the major social components that bind men together in society. So for instance, the British anthropologist Malinowski included inherited artifacts, elements, and consumer goods and social structure within his definition of culture. It is Cooley, Argel, and Carr says, the entire accumulation of artificial objects, conditions, tools, techniques, ideas, symbols, and behavior patterns peculiar to a group of people, possessing a certain consistency of its own and capable of transmission from one generation to another. So some of the other important definitions of culture are as follows. The first definition of culture is according to MacLeaver. Culture is the expression of our nature in our models of living and our thinking, intercourse in our literature, in religion, in recreation, and enjoyment. According also to A. Hobel, culture is the sum total of integrated learned behavior patterns which are characteristic of the members of society, which are therefore results of biological inheritance. Next is culture is the complex whole that consists of everything we think and do as a member of society. It is according to Bierstedt. Next is it's according to Anderson and Parker. Culture is the total content of physiosocial, biosocial, and psychosocial universe man has produced and the socially created mechanism through which these social products operate. So Minolsky also defined culture as the handiwork of man and the medium through which he achieves his ends. According also to H.T. Manzomadar, culture is the sum total of human achievements material as well as non-materials capable of transmission sociologically by tradition and communication vertically as well as horizontally. So combining these several definitions, we may define culture as the sum total of human achievements or the total heritage of man which can be transmitted to man by communication and tradition. It is a way of life of the people in a certain geographical area. Lifestyle and social patterns of society being the direct consequence of the accumulated heritage of ages past distinguish and differentiate one community from another. Culture, therefore, is a moral, intellectual, and spiritual discipline for advancement in accordance with the norms and values based on accumulated heritage. It is imbibing and making our own the lifestyle and social patterns of the group one belongs to. Culture is a system learned behavior shared by and transmitted among the members of the group. Culture also is collective heritage learned by individual and passed from one generation to other. So the individual receives culture as part of social heritage and in turn may reshape the culture and introduce the changes which then become part of the heritage of succeeding generations. So the first characteristic of culture is learned behavior. So not all behavior is learned, but most of it is learned. So by combing one's hair, standing in the line, telling jokes, criticizing the president, and going to the movie, and all constitute behavior which had to be learned. So next is sometimes the term conscious learning and unconscious learning are used to distinguish the learning. So for example, the ways in which a small child learns to handle a tyrannical father or a rejecting mother often affect the ways in which that child 10 or 15 years later handles his relationship with other people. So there are some behavior that is obvious and there is some that is less visible, and this behavior is called overt behavior. So some examples of behavior that is obvious is like people can be seen going to football games or eating with forks or driving automobiles, and some also examples of overt behavior is such as activities as planning tomorrows or feeling hatred for an enemy. So this is a sort of behavior which is not openly visible to other people. So the second characteristic of culture is abstract. So culture exists in the minds or habits of the members of society. Culture is also shared ways of doing and thinking. There are degrees of visibility of cultural behavior ranging from the regularized activities of person to their internal reason for so doing. In other words, we cannot see culture as such, we can only see human behavior. This behavior occurs in regular pattern fashion and it's called culture. So the third characteristic of culture is a pattern of learned behavior. So the definition of culture indicated that the learned behavior of people is patterned. Each person's behavior often depends upon some particular behavior of someone else. The point is that, as a general rule, behaviors are somewhat integrated or organized with the related behaviors of other persons. So the fourth characteristic of culture is the product of behavior. Cultural learnings are the products of behavior. As a person behaves, there occurs changes in him. So he acquires the ability to swim, to feel hatred towards someone, or to sympathize with someone. They have grown out of his previous behaviors. In both ways, the human behavior is the result of behavior. The experience of other people are impressed on one as he grows up, and also many of his traits and abilities have grown out of his own past behaviors. So the fifth characteristic of culture includes attitude, values, and knowledge. So there is widespread error in the thinking of many people who tend to regard the ideas, attitudes, and notions which they have as their own. It is easy to overestimate the uniqueness of one's own attitude and ideas. When there is agreement with other people, it is largely unnoticed. But when there is a disagreement or difference, one is usually conscious of it. Your difference, however, may also be cultural. For example, suppose you are a Catholic and other person a Protestant. The sixth characteristic of culture is culture also includes material object. So man's behavior results in creating object. Men's were behaving when they have made these things. So to make this object requires numerous and various skills which human beings gradually built up through the ages. Man has invented something else and so on. Occasionally, one encounters the view that man does not really make steel or battleship. All these things first existed in a state nature. Man merely modified their form, changed them from a state in which they were to the state in which he now uses them. The chair was first a tree, which man surely did not make, but the chair is more than trees, and the jet airplane is more than iron, and so forth. So the seventh characteristic of culture is shared by the members of society. So the patterns of learned behavior and the result of behavior are possessed not by one or few persons, but usually by a large proportion. So many million of persons share such behavior patterns as Christianity, the use of automobiles, or the English language. So next is person may share different aspects of culture and equally. For example, as Americans do the Christian religion, to some persons, Christianity is the all-important, predominating idea in life. To others, it is less preoccupying or important, and to still others, it is of marginal significance only. So sometimes, the people share different aspects of culture. For example, among the Christians, there are Catholic and Protestant, liberal or conservation, or clergymen or laymen. The point to our discussion is not that the culture or any part of it is shared identically, but that is shared by the members of society to a sufficient extent. So the eighth characteristic of culture is superorganic. So culture is sometimes called superorganic. It implies that culture is somehow superior to nature. The word superorganic is useful when it implies that we may be a quite or different phenomenon from culture point of view. So for example, a tree means different things to the botanist who studies it. The old woman who uses it for shade in the summer late afternoon, the farmer who picks its fruit, the motorist who collides with it, and the young lovers who carve their initial in its trunk, Some physical object and physical characteristic, in other words, may constitute a variety of quite different cultural object and cultural characteristic. So the ninth characteristic of culture is pervasive. So culture is pervasive, it touches every aspect of life. The pervasiveness of culture is manifest in two ways. So first, culture provides an unquestioned context within which individuals' action and response takes place. Not only emotional action, but relational actions are governed by cultural norms. The second is cultural pervades social activities and institutions. So according to Ruth Benedict, a culture, like an individual, is more or less consistent pattern of thought and action. So with each culture, there come into being characteristic purposes not necessarily shared by other types of society. So in obedience to this purpose, each person further consolidates its experience, and in proportion to the urgency of these tribes, the heterogeneous items of behavior take more and more congruous shape. So the 10th characteristic of culture is a way of life. So culture means simply the way of life of a person or their design for living. So according to Clacon and Kelly, a culture is historically the derived system of explicit and implicit design for living, which stand to share by all or special design to a members of a group. So explicit culture refers to similarities in word and action which can be directly observed. So for example, the adolescent cultural behavior can be generalized from regularities in dress, mannerism, and conversation. Implicit culture also means exist in abstract form which are not quite obvious. The 11th characteristic of culture is a human product. Culture is not a force operating by itself and independent of the human actors. So, meaning there is an unconscious tendency to defy culture, to endow it with life and treat it as a thing. Culture also is the creation of society in interaction and depends for its existence upon the continuance of society. So, in a strict sense, therefore, culture does not do anything on its own. It does not cause the individual to act in a particular way, nor does it make the normal individual into a maladjusted one. Culture, in short, is a human product. It is not independently endowed with life. So the 12th characteristic of culture is idealistic. So culture embodies the ideas and norms of a group. So it is a sum total of the ideal patterns and norms of behavior of a group. Culture consists of the intellectual, artistic, and social ideas and institutions which the members of the society profess and to which they strive to conform. So the 13th characteristic of culture is transmitted among members of society. So the cultural ways are learned by person from person. So many of them are handed down by one's elder, by parents, by teacher, and others. So other cultural behaviors are handed up to elders. So some of the transmission for culture is among contemporaries. So for example, the styles of dress, political views, and the use of recent labor savings devices. So one does not acquire a behavior pattern spontaneously, he learns it. That means that someone teaches him and he learns. Much of the learning process, both the teacher and the learner, is quite unconscious, unintentional, or accidental. So the fourth characteristic of culture is continually changing. So there is one fundamental and inescapable attribute of culture, the fact of an ending change. Some societies at some times change slowly, and hence in comparison to other societies seems not to be changing at all, but they are changing even though not obviously so. The 15th characteristic of culture is variable. Culture varies from society to society, group to group. So hence we say culture of India or England, further culture varies from group to group within the same society. There are subcultures within a culture. cluster of patterns which are both related to general culture of the society and yet distinguishable from it called subcultures. The 16th characteristic of culture is culture is an integrated system. So culture possesses an order and system. Its various parts are integrated with each other and any new element which is introduced is also integrated. So the last characteristic of culture is language is the chief vehicle of culture. So man lives not only in the present but also in the past and future. He is able to do this because he possesses a language which transmits to him what was learned in the past and enables him to transmit the accumulated wisdom to the next generation. And a specialized language pattern serves as common bond to the members of a particular group or subculture. Although culture is transmitted in a variety of ways, language is one of the most important vehicles for perpetuating cultural patterns. So to conclude, culture is everything which is socially learned and shared by the members of a society. It is culture that in that wide focus of the world distinguishes individual from individual, group from group, and society. So those are the characteristics of culture. So now let's move on to the functions of culture. So the first function of culture is culture defines situation. So each culture has many subtle cues which define each situation. It reveals whether one should prepare to fight, run, laugh, or make love. So for example, suppose someone approaches you with the right hand outstretched at waist level. What does this mean? That he wishes to shake hands in friendly greetings is perfectly obvious. So obvious that is to anyone familiar with our culture. But in other place or time, the outstretched hand might mean hostility or warning. One does not know what to do in a situation until he has defined the situation. Each society has its insult and fighting words. The cues or hints which define situations appear in infinite variety. A person who moves from one society into a group will spend. So the second function of culture is culture defines attitude, values, and goals. So each person learns in his culture what is good, true, and beautiful. Attitude, values, and goals are defined by the culture, while the individual normally learns them as unconsciously as he learns the language. So attitudes are tendencies to feel and act in a certain ways. Values also are measures of goodness or desirability. For example, we value private property or representative, so government and many other things and experience. Goals are those attainments which are our values defines as worthy. Winning the race, gaining the affections of a particular girl, or becoming president of the firm. By approving certain goals and ridiculing others, the culture channels individuals' ambition. In this way, culture determines the goals of life. So the third function of culture is culture defines myth, legends, and supernatural. So myth and legends are an important part of every culture. They inspire, reinforce effort and sacrifice, and bring comfort in bereavement. Whether they are true is sociologically unimportant. Ghosts are real too. People who believe them and who act upon this belief. We cannot understand the behavior of any group without knowing something of the myths, legends, and supernatural beliefs they hold. Myths and legends are powerful forces in groups' behavior. So, culture also provides the individual with a ready-made view of the universe. So, the nature of divine power and the importance of moral issues are defined by the culture. The individual does not have to select, but the fourth function of culture is culture provides behavior patterns. So individuals need to go through painful trial and error learning to know what foods can be eaten without poisoning himself or how to live among people without fear. He finds a ready-made set of patterns awaiting him which he needs only to learn and follow. So the culture maps out the path to matrimony. The individual does not have to wonder how one secures a mate. He knows the procedure defined by his culture. If men use culture to advance their purposes, it seems clear also that a culture imposes limits on human and activities. The need for order calls forth another function of culture that so directing behavior that disorderly behavior is restricted and orderly behavior is promoted. So social order cannot rest on the assumption that men will spontaneously behave ways conducive to social harmony. So the fifth function of culture is culture and society. The relationship between society, culture, and personality is stressed by Ralph Lenton. According to him, a society is an organized group of individuals. A culture is an organized group of learned responses. The individual is a living organism capable of independent thought, feeling, and action. But with his independence limited and all his resources profoundly modified by contact with the society and culture in which he develops. A society cannot exist apart from culture. A society is always made a person and their group. So people carry and transmit culture, but they are not culture. No culture can exist except as it's embodied in a society. So no society can operate without culture directives. So like matter and energy, like mind and body, they're interdependent and interacting yet express different aspects of the human situation. So next is one must always keep in mind the interdependence and the reciprocal relationship between culture and society. Each is distinguishable concept in which the patterning and organization of the whole is more important than any other component's part. So that's the end of my discussion. Thank you for listening and have a good day.